Hello, and welcome to Unknowable, the podcast where we talk about all things mysterious, unusual, or unknowable. I'm Justine.
And I'm Gray. Some weeks we break down one larger mystery between the two of us. Other weeks we pick two smaller mysteries on a theme and teach each other about them based on our own independent research. This week, we have two psychological concepts.
Yeah, phenomena. Two phenomenons.
Two phenomenons.
Yeah, they're both things that have theories but no definitive source.
Right.
It's kind of cool. We're pretty good at picking themes.
I think so too.
I think.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing how it happens.
I'm always interested. Weirdly, we always find out while we're recording, like, oh wow, these actually go together really well.
Yeah.
It's like you'd think we planned it, but we didn't.
We really didn't. We literally look at our list of possible topics and we're just like trying. It's like that card matching game where you're like flipping over cards to try to find ones that are the same.
Yep.
We're just trying to stare at this like, which of these two are kind of related.
Right.
Yeah.
So this week, I'm going to talk about Folie, Deux.
And I'm talking about the Call of the Void.
So
it's going to be cool.
It's intense.
Yeah. And Gray's going to go first.
I'm going to go first. Okay. So, Folie, Deux.
Yes.
It's a psychological concept that essentially refers to shared madness, is sort of the old-timey way to put it, or it's, in a more psychological terms, it's shared delusion.
Okay.
So, to preface it, before you start to think of like what it actually is, you have to realize like what it's not. So if you are part of a culture and your culture believes something very strongly, no matter how crazy it sounds to, you know, a Western person or whatever, if you believe the same things that your larger culture believes, then it's not considered to be a delusion. It's not considered to be like a mental illness. So there's a lot of cases of, you know, people in a certain culture believing something that we would consider to be a delusion in the West, but because it's part of their culture, it's what they've learned from since they were growing up, it's not considered folie à deux. It doesn't fall under that same category. It's kind of like a weird psychological concept. It's not even in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for Mental Disorders. There's some related ones, but folie à deux in and of itself is not considered to be its own standalone mental disorder.
Okay.
But it basically consists of two or more people who share a delusion, who share some sort of, usually there's like hallucination involved, or there's some sort of like paranoia underlying the delusion. You can, so there's folie à deux, which is the folly of two people. You can also have folie à trois, folie à quatre, folie en famille, folie à plaisirs.
We are so good at French.
Just butchered French.
Yes.
I'm so sorry to everybody who speaks French.
Yeah, everybody who actually speaks French.
But basically those translate to folie of three, folie of four, folie of the family, or the folie of many. So the most known is two people, but you can have a whole family. I'm going to talk about a specific instance of a whole family.
I think I might know what it is now.
Right? No, that's another one.
Oh, damn.
But there's another one that I know you're going to know about.
I like that you know which one I thought that it is and you know it's not that one.
Yes.
All right, cool.
We'll get there.
I'm excited.
So broadly speaking, there's two sorts of like types of folie à deux. There's folie imposée, where there's a sort of like dominant person who's enforcing their will on a like subservient person. So they're called the inducer and the acceptor.
Whoa.
So there's one. So it's usually like the inducer is strong, dominant personality who convinces a more subservient personality acceptor into believing whatever delusion they believe through either being like charismatic or shared trauma. There's a lot of cases of like if you ever have like a husband who like murders, like it's like a serial killer, and like the wife helps, you know, not to be like sexist and use like gendered stereotypes, but that's usually the breakup is the male is like the dominant one in that relationship, and the female sort of like accepts it and may believe some sort of delusions in and of the murder itself, of like they're serving the will of God, or you know, who knows what. So that would be like folie imposée, or there's folie simultanée. simultaneous. I don't
Whoa.
know. I'm like going like Spanish.
Yeah, I was gonna say that felt a little Spanish.
Can't speak French. But it's so the idea of folie simultanée is you have two people who already have a pre-existing mental disorder, and they sort of come together and create a delusion together. So it's not one person. One of them may have like the genesis of the delusion and bring it to the other person, but they sort of develop it and flesh it out together rather than one person imposing on another person. In terms of treatment, when you have folie imposée, you have the inducer is really hard to treat. They are usually have the strongest like sense of delusion, and they require medication to sort of like lose their delusion, whereas the secondary or the acceptor in the relationship, 9 times out of 10, if you just remove them from the inducer, then they will start to get better and they start to realize that the delusion was a delusion.
Right.
With folie simultanée, you have both people to get treated. They both usually require medication, which I think that sort of explains how it functions in the brain a little bit. Like, it's sad to think about somebody being like kind of subservient to someone else and then believing it so hard that you develop like delusions or hallucinations, or you full on like see what they're seeing.
Yeah, it's wild.
Freaks me out. So I've been super general this whole time. It's probably hard to follow what I'm saying because I'm not using specific examples.
Yeah,
but
I'm really excited for examples.
I'm gonna get into some examples. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So there's one case of Margaret and Michael. They weren't identified by last names. So they were like an older couple who lived together, and they believed that people would sneak into their house at night and sprinkle dust and like dust bunnies and basically like make their house dirty while they were sleeping, and also would like take their shoes and like wear down their shoes while they were sleeping. So they essentially believed that they would wake up every day and the house was dirtier than it was when they went to bed,
Right.
and that their shoes were more worn down than they were when they went to bed.
Weird.
And so they both fully believed that people were entering their home to do this. So it's like a really like
Wow.
disturbing thing to think about.
Right.
Like,
and like
they fully believed it.
seemingly like a relatively harmless belief, I guess, depending on like how paranoid they got
Right.
about it, like how much they were freaking out about it.
Right.
But if you just thought that was a thing, like, okay.
That freaks me out. Like, that would freak the hell out of me if I thought
Yeah.
that was true.
Right?
Because that's like, they're not breaking into like steal anything. They're just breaking
Yeah.
into like take sandpaper to your shoes or something. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's
Like,
freaky.
why? Why would somebody do that?
Right. That was a case of folie simultanée, where they sort of both had a pre-existing mental disorder and started living together and developed this delusion together.
Interesting.
There wasn't an inducer or an acceptor. Next case study. This might be the one you were thinking of. So in Melbourne, Australia,
Yes.
there was a family of 5
Yes.
who all of a sudden packed up their car in a really like panicked but also kind of like mechanical and like robotic way. They just packed up their car, not talking to each other. It's all, I think there's a video. They're like their house had like a security camera, and so there's security camera footage
weird.
of them doing this. They're packing up their car, totally quiet, not talking to each other, panicking, and they drove halfway across the state of Victoria in Queensland. I don't know if it's a state. See,
Yeah, I'm
the
not
province
sure.
of Queensland.
Right. I'm never
Victoria?
really sure how that works.
I don't know. They drove halfway. They drove 1,000 miles.
Yeah.
From where they were,
That's pretty substantial.
because they thought that somebody was trying to rob or kill them.
Interesting.
One member of the family was like the genesis of this
Yeah.
delusion, and the rest of them fully believed it to the point that they were helping and that they were like all running together.
Jesus.
But there was, in this case, there was an inducer who made the whole family believe this delusion.
I remember there being like the kids were on the older side, like at least teenagers.
Yeah.
I remember because this was on BuzzFeed Unsolved.
Oh, interesting.
It was awesome. And I remember them talking about like some of the kids, like they would stop at various places like for gas or whatever. And at some point, like a few of the kids kind of started breaking away from the group, like
Right.
one by one or like pairs at a time or whatever, to be like, and then they'd either like come back, like they'd find them, or they would just be gone. But like, I feel like it seemed like some of the kids maybe were like, time time to go.
I don't think this is real.
Yeah, this is not really happening, but it seemed like the parents were like in it
Exactly.
the whole time.
So that might be more like described as folie à deux rather than folie en famille.
Right.
Because the parents absolutely 100% believed it.
Yeah.
And the kids were more, I mean, what choice do they have?
Well, yeah, I'd be freaked out if my parents were seemingly like convinced of something. Like, you would be like, okay, shit, let's go.
Right.
But then maybe at some point, like, the more they talked about it, or maybe they asked questions on the drive and they're like,
this doesn't add up.
seem real. But I remember either it was on BuzzFeed Unsolved or I watched on my own, but like they talked to at least the kids after. And like the kids even then were like, I don't really know what happened. Like, it wasn't even like, yeah, my parents are nuts, we don't know what that was about. Like, they were just like, I don't know why we did that. Like, they didn't really have an explanation.
Right.
For like, even like, oh yeah, we thought it was this. They're just like, shit, I don't know what just happened.
Right. And that's why it's interesting. Like, I'll get into it after the case studies, but like the sort of like genesis of it isn't clear. And there's it's not like, schizophrenia presents in your, when you're in your early 20s, and there's all these like neurological like signs and symptoms that you can like sort of latch onto and understand like why it's happening. But like folie à deux, it's just super like random. You can have that onset when you're like a child. You can be that Michael and Margaret were like pretty old living in their house this way. So like it varies. We have no idea why it happens. It's freaky.
That's part of why it's scary.
Right.
That you just don't know when it could strike, or like who it would strike with.
Right.
Or what the idea would be, or like what the hell you do. You
could be a very healthy person. You just meet the right inducer, and all of a sudden you're believing people are breaking into your house to wear it on your shoes.
Dude, it makes sense, honestly. Yeah. Like, I don't know if I've ever been part of that, but like I have met some people in my life where it's like that stereotype of like somebody who could like you jump off a bridge for them. Like there are people who will just make you believe anything. Like you will just go along with whatever. Definitely more into that when I was like a teenager. I feel like it was like much more easy to be like influenced by somebody and just be like, woo, and just do crazy shit.
Right.
Like the person that your parents didn't like that you would become friends with, and then you'd start to like go out late at night and like not come home when you're supposed to, and like start drinking, and your parents are like, what the fuck? Yeah.
I might know who you're talking about.
Yeah. There were maybe a few friends like that. But yeah, but when you're with that person, you like just didn't, it's not quite the same, but I could see that could like escalate to that, where like I definitely maybe had some friends at that point in my life when if they were like, dude, we're being chased, like we gotta go, I'd be like, shit, okay.
Right. And maybe you'd question it at first, but like the longer you sort of like lived with it, I could imagine it just completely, you start to believe it because that's your way of life. Like, you kind of don't have a choice at that point.
Right.
It's freaky.
Man, that's awesome.
Have you heard of the company Theranos?
No, I don't think so.
It was big in the news a couple years ago. It was this healthcare company. This woman started it. She was hailed as like the youngest female billionaire in America for starting this company called Theranos. Essentially what they did was they made a machine that would like test your blood for various diseases, but it was almost like Redbox style. They were trying to sell them to like, they got like a contract for Walgreens.
Whoa.
They had all these crazy people who like co-signed them too, like Henry Kissinger, weirdly enough. But so they were basically gonna like revolutionize healthcare by having really cheap blood tests and really accurate blood tests and stuff. And it was this huge company. They never actually rolled anything out. But like right when they were like at their sort of zenith of like the company was valued at like $9 billion at one point.
Jesus.
And then all of a sudden it started to come out that like these tests were not nearly as like comprehensive or accurate as they were purporting that they were. And basically the whole thing like just collapsed in on itself, and like they found out that like that they were defrauding investors, and so it basically like blew up really fast and then like imploded on itself really fast as a company. But I was reading this article about how the founder, Elizabeth Holmes, who was the CEO of Theranos, and her husband or partner, Ramesh Balwani, who was the COO. So she's the CEO, he's the COO of the company. They were also in a relationship together, that they were suffering from folie à deux because they both, it's like they were like convicted of like defrauding investors, but this article is making the argument that like, it's actually not an article, it's a whole book. But
oh wow.
They were making the argument that they fully believed that their machine did what it said that they did.
Interesting.
And that like anybody who was trying to like showing them science that like it was either lying or like falsifying scientific studies, and they fully believed to the end that like their machine really tested for what it said it tested.
Wow.
And provided the results that it did.
Yeah, and they just refused to think otherwise.
Right. And that was interesting because I had like read about that in the news, and I didn't read about it from that perspective, and I'm like, wow, that's a really like fascinating like case study and
right,
very, very visible Folie Deux.
I bet there's more like that.
Right.
I could see that, like that's like its own form of,
right.
I don't even know what you'd call that, like, but just being so convinced that your whatever is going to be successful and is going to work,
right.
and like any like logical scientific proof otherwise, it's just like nope,
they're making it up.
Yeah, they're making it up. Like, and I think that's where it becomes like the delusion. It's not just like, no, you're wrong. It's like, no, you're conspiring against me.
Right.
This is like a whole thing. You're all like planning this together.
Like,
it's like,
I think it's like like what kind of like ties all these together is paranoia.
Yeah.
And that like there's somebody out to get you, or there's somebody who's like trying to like get one over on you.
Damn.
That's kind of what all of these have in common.
Yeah. Which is also scary too, because it would make you turn on like everybody.
Right. Except for that one person who shares your delusion.
Yeah.
And that's the only person you can trust in life because they see the world the way that you do.
Jesus.
It's freaky.
Yeah, that's not good.
I didn't see anything about this, but I wonder if cults fall into this.
I was gonna ask that.
I couldn't find any like there's no like direct links. I think it's a related function of the brain, but I don't think you can't call like a cult like Folie and Famille or whatever.
I wonder why. Because it's like it's not the same as like a cultural belief.
Right.
Because it's not spanning, an entire area. It's cults are generally a pretty small group.
Right.
And usually there is a leader of the cult.
A charismatic inducer.
Right. And then, it's not just one person that's being, what was the word for the other person?
A acceptor.
An acceptor. Yeah, so there's usually more than one acceptor, but it's still a group of acceptors.
Right.
Being influenced by one inducer.
Right.
That seems like it would fit.
And they all believe fully what the inducer is telling them. Like the Heaven's Gate cult fully believed that they were going to, leave their bodies and get hitched up to a UFO that was flying by on Halley's Comet.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people that left cults, or if a cult like got dissolved somehow, that afterwards were just like, I don't fucking know.
Right.
Like they don't know how they got swept up in it, how they believed it so fully.
Right.
But they're just like, that.
I bet it is. I bet it's related. They just haven't been able to like scientifically draw because the fact that Folie Deux isn't even in the DSM shows that it's probably not super well understood. Because I get the impression that it's sort of like is a function of several different mental disorders rather than just being like its own diagnosis. It's sort of like you have schizophrenia and this other person has this other disorder, and you have Folie Deux together, even though you have two fully unrelated disorders.
Right.
So it's like, it's hard to pin down in that way. So maybe cults are a good example of it, but it hasn't been proven beyond a doubt.
So there must be people out there who are not susceptible, really.
Right.
Though.
Not susceptible in their present state of mind.
Right.
But I imagine almost anybody, given the right circumstances, could fall for this, especially given the right charismatic inducer.
Well, and I bet some of it is probably somewhat like anxiety induced too.
Oh yeah.
I could see that would be a lot easier to fall into if you were already like in a heightened state of anxiety for any reason, like not even related to whatever you freak out about.
Right.
But just that like heightened, and that would add to the paranoia.
Yep.
But I could see that would just be like shit.
And then you meet someone else who's just as anxious as you are, and one of you plants the seed in the other one's head of like, oh, like I bet it's like this batshit. Like I bet people are breaking in and sandpapering our shoes.
Right.
And you're like, fuck, that makes a lot of sense. Because like I noticed that my shoes are like more worn down, and then that just sets the ball rolling.
This is very similar to my phenomena, because I think it has similar, and you'll see when I talk about this, but I think they both have similar aspects of the fact that like probably a lot of people, whether it was with another person or even kind of on their own, or like just as a result of somebody like suggesting something, have almost started down the path of like Folie Deux. Yeah. To be like believing something kind of out there. Right. But are able to stop themselves early to be like, no, I'm not going to do that. And just not let themselves go down that path. Yeah. Kind of along the lines of like the intrusive thoughts where like
Yeah.
almost everybody has intrusive thoughts of some kind, but just most people are able to just be like, nope.
Compartmentalize it.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
do something to stop it in its tracks, even if you let it go crazy once in a while. Like, it's not a thing that's like ruining your life.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
Super cool. Also, an X-Files episode
Yeah.
called Folie.
Oh yeah. Look it up.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That's a good one.
We were just talking about it. It's a dude who works at like a telemarketing type of like, he's in an office with cubicles, and he starts to like see weird stuff around the office, particularly concerning his boss, where he'll see these weird flickers, like kind of out of the corner of his eye type of thing, where the boss looks like a giant insect, like he's clearly like a monster.
Yep.
And then he starts to notice that like his coworkers will go in to have like a meeting with the boss and go in totally normal, and then they'll come out, and to this worker, they'll look, I feel like I remember them looking like, yeah, kind of like zombies or like kind of dead looking.
Yeah.
And he was like, fuck, like they had been changed by this boss.
Yep.
Which is interesting because it seems to be implied, like classic this type of scenario, because it seems like he's been working there for a bit.
Right.
Like he knows his coworkers and like he hates his job, but whatever, he knows people.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, the boss like turns into this monster.
Right.
And then I remember he holds up the whole place and like holds the guy hostage because he's like, in his mind, he's like losing his shit. Like, dude,
Right.
how does nobody see this? Like, you're all being changed. And everybody's just like, holy shit, dude.
Yep.
But he's completely convinced. It's a good episode.
And I think the Folie comes into play because doesn't Mulder start to believe it?
Yes, Mulder comes in, I think, to like defuse the hostage situation.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure ends up getting held hostage himself.
Yep.
And he might have done that on purpose. I feel like it would be a Mulder thing to like,
Classic Mulder.
yeah, to let like, oh, why don't you let them go? You don't really need them.
Right.
But then Mulder starts to see it, that the boss actually is a monster.
Classic Mulder.
Of course, classic Mulder. And he starts to see his like true form, and then he's like, oh shit.
Fuck.
And then of course, like nothing happens to the boss because everybody's like, this guy's nuts.
Yep.
And like further proven by him holding everybody hostage with a gun.
Right.
But then Mulder's like, we gotta do something about this because this guy actually is a monster. Yeah, and he is. He totally is. I don't remember how that ends, but
Not me neither.
a
Look
good
it up.
episode.
It's a great episode.
yeah, look it up, watch it. Watch X-Files if you haven't already.
Watch X-Files.
Watch the whole series. Well,
All right. So I got two more.
yes.
I'm going to save the kind of the craziest one for last. So this one's pretty crazy, though. So Christine and Leah Papin, these two French girls, 1933, living in Le Pen, France.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, right.
I think. I mean, I don't know what it's supposed to sound like, but it
Sounds good to
sounded
me.
legit.
So they were like maids. They like worked cleaning this like really nice house for this like husband, wife, and like their kids, like really rich family. This giant mansion. They were both really quiet, and they only spoke to each other. They kind of kept to themselves. These two girls, they were sisters. So one day, the husband leaves, and the two girls torture and murder the woman, like the owner of the house, and
Jesus.
her daughter, Genevieve.
Wow.
So they like ripped out their fingernails, gouged out their eyes, stabbed them multiple times.
Damn.
Really gruesomely tortured and murdered the wife and the daughter. And when the police showed up, the two sisters were laying naked in bed together, covered in blood.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a weird sexual undertone to their whole relationship too.
Yeah.
And they said, like, when they asked, like, why, like, they fully admitted, like, yeah, we did this. And they're like, what happened? They're like, a fuse just burst and we just had to do it. Like,
Whoa.
they like, fully admitted it, but, like, didn't really, like, give a good reason why.
Damn.
And the older sister was totally, like, the inducer, I think, in this relationship. When they both went to, like, psychiatric facilities to, like, you know, be cared for or whatever, because they were clearly something not right there.
Yeah.
The younger sister was like just kind of like not catatonic, but just like quiet and kept to herself, just kind of did her own thing. But the older sister would like, the longer she was away from the younger sister, would like scream and flail and I think even have seizures and like have like a really like strong physiological response to being separated from her sister. But when they would like bring them together, which I'm not clear why they would bring them back together. I feel like I would keep them separated. The older sister would get like really like touchy-feely in like almost like a sexual way with her sister, and like
Weird.
there was like a very like strange relationship that they had already. But they both just this was sort of interesting because there's not a strong like maybe they have this strong like narrative or story in their head that they were telling each other that they both believed that led them to have to kill in this very gruesome way, torture and kill their boss and her daughter essentially. But it never came out. They never said why. They basically just said that they like snapped.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like super creepy because both those girls probably knew exactly why in their head and they could have explained it, but they didn't.
Right.
And I want to know why. What
and
did they see?
It makes it seem like the boss and her daughter like were kind of like wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
It wasn't against them specifically.
Right.
It was just...
Or like same thing, like what if like they believed that like the wife was like some monster or some serial killer, like they thought that they were like doing something good by killing this woman.
Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Right. Not freaky.
I did not see that coming.
Right. Right.
Just like, two sisters, and then they gruesomely killed somebody. Like, okay.
Really awfully.
Shit. Damn.
Yeah. All right. So you ready for so I was floored by this because I didn't even think about this when I started researching Folie, Deux.
Cool.
But
this is the case that I wouldn't necessarily associate with it, but now it's going to make sense.
But you definitely know of it.
Yes.
The Slender Man murder.
Oh, shit, yeah.
Right?
Totally.
Fucking A.
Yep.
So you got in Waukesha, Wisconsin, these two girls, Anissa Wire and Morgan Geyser, lured their friend Peyton Lautner into the woods and repeatedly stabbed her in the throat and chest.
Ugh.
She survived.
Which
is fucking wild.
Yeah, she's still alive.
Because they like the knife was like a millimeter away from her heart, like lacerated her liver and like her organs. Like it was awful.
Yeah.
But these two girls did this. They lured her into the woods to kill her to impress Slender Man. So I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with who Slender Man is, but Slender Man was created for the website Creepypasta.
Yeah.
The forum
The
Creepypasta.
forum, yeah, I guess a forum.
So he was created as like a creepy story, as this tall, faceless, slender man.
Yeah.
Who wears like a black suit. May or may not have tentacles coming out of his back. Who's just kind of generally creepy, like creeping around in the woods. I'm sure there's mythology about what he does, but
yeah, which is cool because it's been developed not even really by the creator.
Right.
At this point, it like has taken on a life.
Its
Yeah, it's so creepy.
So creepy.
Well, it was cool. I heard an episode of another podcast about the Slender Man killings, but they were talking about the inception of him.
Yeah.
Being like the guy who did it. It was literally just a thread that was like make up a creepy character, I think.
Right.
And the dude had posted some photographs, like old looking photographs of like kids at a playground or whatever type of thing. And then he would like Photoshop in the Slender Man, like kind of off in the distance, like in the woods.
Yeah.
But he would make like little captions for the photos. So it was like a really unique thing. It wasn't just like an illustration or something of like a creature.
Right.
It was like he kind of made this weird backstory that made it sound really believable.
Right.
Like one of them was referring to there being like some kind of fire or something, I remember. Like the school had caught on fire and it was saying that like these are the only photos that were like recovered or something, and it was like showing these kids with like the Slender Man in the background. So it just kind of made you feel like you were really reading like,
real history.
Yeah, real history. So I think that like helped with it taking off because just one dude
it's wild.
did this and it just fucking exploded.
And so like it's interesting because it's not like Chupacabra or like the Jersey Devil where it's like something that is sort of like predates like the internet or predates like our consciousness of cryptids. It's something that was very like we can point to the exact like day and year that it was created and the person who created it.
Yeah.
And yet these two girls were Anissa was really like the inducer in the situation. But I mean like Morgan was definitely like a willing participant. But Anissa was the more dominant one who sort of like led this whole thing. She wanted to impress Slender Man. She thought that like she was like meant to be with Slender Man.
Yeah.
And in order to impress him, she had to murder her friend.
They wanted to go to his mansion.
Yeah. Which is super creepy.
Super creepy.
Maybe the creepiest part about this whole story is that they were going to go kill her. They were like brought her into the woods and they like taped her mouth up and like taped her arms and stuff, but then like didn't do anything, and they like decided like no, we're not gonna do it, like for whatever reason, like we're not gonna do it right now, like it wasn't right. And so Anissa later said that like Slender Man told her that her friend had to live another day.
Oh.
So
Jesus.
then they were able to convince her the next day to
Oh my
go
God.
back into the woods with them.
Jesus.
Right. Which is super freaky. Like, you go into the woods with these two girls and they tie you up.
Yeah.
And they have a knife. And then they, like, let you go. And the next day they're like, hey, you want to come back in the woods? And you're like, yeah.
Sure.
Why not?
What are the odds of that happening again?
What can happen?
What could happen?
Yeah.
You definitely couldn't tie me up and pull out a knife.
It's freaky. So this is a very clear, like, I like this one because it has a very clear narrative that you understand why the two girls did what they did. Like, as awful and horrific and batshit crazy as it is, you understand it, and there's a reason, and there's a character, and there's like a plot that you can follow, that you know that these two girls were totally immersed in. Whereas the other ones, they're sort of creepy, but like they don't have as strong of a narrative, I feel like.
Right. And the Slender Man thing is batshit because, like you said, it's not like Slender Man is kind of its own unique, I don't know, unique thing just because, yeah, even with the Chupacabra and Mothman and every other creature like that exists that's sort of like an urban legend or a cryptid or whatever, like those all have supposed sightings. Like those didn't start as just like a story and then people are like, oh no, it's real. Like those started as people seeing something and kind of creating a character around like what they think it is based on what people saw and like common descriptions.
Right.
But Slender Man, like you said, can be pinpointed to an exact day and time.
Right.
You can go and look at that thread and see like this is the moment
that Slender Man was created.
I can't remember the guy's username. It's a great username though. But whatever his username is, created Slender Man. And yeah, it took off on its own and people have all kinds of different things. Like I don't think the tentacles are part of his design, but like that came later, and obviously like there's a movie about him.
Oh yeah.
And all kinds of stuff. So it's batshit because it's just like we know if this was just something that people made up.
Right.
It still is super creepy.
Super creepy.
And if you've ever seen the YouTube series Marble Hornets, it's kind of loosely based on the Slender Man. I don't think they call him the Slender Man. I forget what they call him. Not the Slender Man, but it's seemingly like the same dude.
Yeah.
It's a creepy ass YouTube series because they made it. It's supposed to be like these dudes were working on this like school film project together, and it kind of like went off the rails, and they ended up like one of the dudes that was kind of going a little crazy like decided to end it, but then the other friend I think like goes and finds all the videos because he's like, what the hell happened? Like I need to know. You know, I need to find all those video clips, and so this is the YouTube series is supposedly him going back through the video clips. So it's kind of a mix because he's not watching them in order really.
Right.
And so it's kind of a mix of like stuff that they were doing for this project. I don't know if they were trying to like make a short film or something like that. But then you can see like kind of this dude's descent into madness, his friend. And so the video series is brilliant because there's like tons and tons of videos, and the way they put it out initially was like one a week or whatever. Like it was supposed to be him going through the videos, like I'll post relevant things as I find them type of situation.
Yeah.
And so it felt very believable that like this was really happening, that this footage was real.
Yeah.
And there's some scenes where you get like a glimpse of whatever they call him, but it's Slender Man.
Yeah.
And it is freaky as hell. But it's cool because some of the videos are literally like 30 seconds long.
Yeah.
And then some are like 15 minutes long. So you just like go through, there's tons and tons of them.
That's a cool project.
It's cool. Yeah. One of those things where it's like probably not as cool looking at it now, but like at the time it was like, oh shit. Because you fully like put yourself in like this is fucking real.
Yeah.
But so I can see, I get it.
Yeah.
I totally get it.
I get it to a point.
Yeah.
And I guess what it comes down to, so what I was fascinated with in like researching Folie Deux is whenever I read about like a psychological concept or like a mental disorder or something, I always try to think of like what is the mechanism in the human brain that either allowed this to happen or what purpose does it serve in sort of like natural selection and like we as humans, how we got to where we are. And I feel like Folie Deux probably grew out of us being in, you know, hunter-gatherers. We're in a small tribe. You sort of like your whole life is the people around you, you know, like the 5 or 10 people who are like your immediate like tribe. And you know, one person believes like, no, we can't drink out of that well because the water's poisoned. And you have to like, you're just like, all right, we can't drink out of that well because that person might be right.
Right.
But that person could also just be suffering from a delusion, could have a mental disorder, could have something else. So there must be some strong will in our brain to identify with and sort of like see the world through the eyes of people that we love and respect, that it can go so wrong as to allow us to fully believe a delusion that someone else believes.
Yeah.
Take on the mental illness of someone close to us in its like full form.
Yeah.
Which is freaky.
It's freaky. Well, yeah, because a lot of these cases are people that are close in some way, whether they're friends or siblings or
they're
families
all people
or
who
whatever.
have close proximity to each other.
Yeah. So that makes sense. And yeah, it's not like it's even just like a sympathetic response. Like you are like putting yourself in that person's shoes.
Yeah.
And then fully believing.
You are seeing the world like through their eyes. Like you're seeing whatever delusion. You're seeing Slender Man. You're seeing whatever it is that you're seeing.
Yeah.
Which is super freaky.
Which is really intense, especially when you end up killing people.
Yeah.
Yeah, or almost killing people.
Right.
But still. That was pretty bad.
Right. It's
wow.
wild. Yeah.
Shit.
Folie, so that's all I got.
That was a good one.
Folie Deux.
That was more extensive than mine.
Really?
Yeah. Slightly more interesting, too. But mine's cool.
All right.
I swear.
Let's hear.
All right. So, Call the Void.
Yes.
If you've ever been driving on the highway and had that momentary thought of like, I could just swerve into traffic. All the time. Or been on the edge of a cliff is like the classic example.
Yep.
And you just have that moment where you just like, are like, I could just jump.
That's the more common one for me.
Yeah.
On like when I like to go on the top of parking garages to look at cities.
Yep.
And I always look over the edge and I always have that thought of like, what if I jumped?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to.
No.
No.
That's the whole thing. Like, you've been on a boat and you had a moment of like what it would feel like to just crash into those waves.
Yeah.
That is the call of the void.
Yeah.
Or, I don't really know how to say this. It's another French phrase, of course. L'appel du vide. Du vide? Vide? In French, where the term was first coined. Edgar Allan Poe called it the imp of the perverse. Freud called it the death drive, which I like that.
Classic Freud. That's dope.
And yeah, around 50% of people, it's estimated, have experienced some aspects of this, though it's not really talked about that much because how do you really bring that up? Unless it's with somebody you're close with, to be like, hey, have you ever like been on a cliff and just thought about jumping? Because most people would be like, Even I feel like if they had experienced it, they'd be like, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, it hasn't really been definitively explained. So some people try to kind of group that in with suicidal ideation. But the fact is that generally the call of the void is a very spontaneous, impulsive thought.
Right.
While suicide is typically more thought out and planned.
Yeah, it's like I feel like suicidal ideation, like the word ideation, like you're focused on it. You're just constantly pervading your thoughts. Like it's all like it keeps coming up even if you try to forget about it.
Exactly.
Whereas the call of the void is like the exact opposite.
Exactly.
You're not thinking about suicide at all, and then you're having a great time on top of a building, and then all of a sudden you're like, what if I jumped?
Right. Yeah, it's more of like a curious feeling. We're talking about intrusive thoughts. They kind of both urges come from that same idea. Like suicidal ideation typically comes from those intrusive thoughts.
Right.
But typically the suicidal ideation would come from a long period of not being able to control those intrusive thoughts and just having them over and over and them torturing you. The idea that suicide for a lot of people is a relief.
Right.
Is the idea that you're being tortured by your own mind and you're having these thoughts and you just aren't able to put them aside or forget about them or function without them impacting your life. But the call of the void kind of is just like a single intrusive thought coming in where it's just like, hey, I could jump off this cliff. I could drive into traffic.
Right.
But obviously the difference there is that people typically when they experience the call of the void are instantly like, no. Like you're not even really seriously thinking it. You're not pondering it for real.
Right.
You just have a moment of just like, what if I did that?
Right.
Like, what would that be like? It was talking about people, the thought of, like, even driving down the street and thinking like, oh, I could like just veer over and hit that person. You don't want to hit that person.
No.
You don't know that person.
I hope not.
They didn't do anything to you. You don't actually want to kill somebody.
Right.
It's just the thought of like, what if?
I could.
So yeah, most people feel it, but it's not an issue to keep it at bay. Otherwise, more people would probably just veer onto the sidewalk and kill people because they'd just be like, I'm just going to see what this is like.
Be a whole lot more violent crime.
But yeah, it's not a serious desire. It's just that weird thought. So a lot of scientists call it the high place phenomenon, which again doesn't totally encompass it because it's not only being on a high place, again, like driving in traffic, being on a boat. It's really anything that you think that would be a destructive thing to do.
Right.
Generally, like, yeah, pretty crazy destructive thing that you all of a sudden just momentarily out of nowhere are just like, huh.
Yeah. It all just flits into your mind and then flits out just as quick.
Exactly. So, April Smith, an associate professor of psychology at Miami University in Ohio, says, quote, "An urge to jump reaffirms an urge to live." She co-authored a study about the phenomenon and found that it could potentially be the result of a miscommunication in your brain. So you're on the edge of a cliff, your brain starts to kind of panic, to be like, ah, shit, like you're on the edge, like you're getting too close. So you take a couple steps back, and then your more rational brain is trying to explain why you took those steps back, and it kind of comes to the conclusion of like, oh, you maybe wanted to jump. Which isn't really what it is, and I don't really know. Yeah, I don't really buy this one because...
Yeah, that's not super satisfying.
No, because for me, anytime I've experienced the call of the void, it's been a pretty conscious thought.
Yeah.
Of what would it be like if I jumped. It's not like a... Yeah. I don't know.
It doesn't... Like, it feels to me like it's a... Just like... It's almost like your brain's like presenting an option. Like you have like an A and B choice.
Right.
Choice A is don't jump. Keep living your life. But it's like... Or you could just jump.
You could jump. Yeah. There's Jennifer Hames, part of the Department of Psychology at Florida State University, led a study on it. I think she studied something like 350-ish people. And so part of her summarization was that the call of the void, quote, reflects people's sensitivity to internal cues and actually affirms their will to live. Again, I'm not really sure about that. It's a theory. Adam Anderson, a cognitive neuroscientist at Cornell University, has a theory that it's more along the lines of a tendency to gamble. So essentially, like, if you're afraid of heights, why not gamble against that and just jump? Huh. His quote was, "Future gain is not as immediate as avoiding present danger." Not really sure about that either.
No.
Because it doesn't always happen in a situation where you're scared of something.
I feel like this like rationalizing it too much. Like
right.
like you're like it's assuming that your brain is like more logical than it. Like they're trying to make it seem more logical than it really is.
Right. I don't really think
it's logical.
No, one of the only two really. Well, even the last one I'm not totally convinced. But so there's one simple theory that just as humans we have an innate desire somewhere deep down to sabotage ourselves. I don't really think it's quite that simple either.
I don't think it's that simple, but that's closer.
That could be closer. And then the thing that I thought was closest, the, quote, vertigo of possibility theory. The idea that we can choose to do such a reckless thing is tempting in itself. That's the only one that I could buy.
That seems more like to me.
Yeah.
Like, I just thought of drawing this conclusion. So, like, playing Grand Theft Auto. You go on top of a high... You can... Like, you're essentially presented with the ability to do almost everything that you can do in, like, real life.
Yeah.
And I personally choose to do, like, wild shit. Like, like...
I remember when you used to play that
crash a plane and, like, jump off a building. Like, you can do anything, and it's really just to see, like, what would happen.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, like, it's pure experimentation.
Yep.
I don't think it's, like, my conscious brain is trying to gamble or something. Like,
no,
I don't buy that.
No, I can see the vertigo of possibility just because that is, I feel like that's part of it is, you know, yeah, you're driving, like, again, the driving example, like you're driving along and you have this, I don't want to say intoxicating because that makes it seem like you're like psyched about it. Like, yes,
fuck yeah.
But it is a weird moment of just like, I could drive off that bridge. I could like crash into traffic. I could just like go into that ditch. Like, it is the reminder at times that, like, you could do anything.
Right.
Of course there will be consequences, and I think that's part of it is that you're not really thinking about those consequences. Like, when you think about jumping off the cliff, you're not really thinking about smashing into the rocks below.
Right.
You're just thinking about jumping.
That's what stops you from actually going through with it. Is first you think, I could do this, and then your conscious or your rational brain kicks in, and it's like, dude, but if you did, this shit would happen. And you're like, oh, yeah, I probably shouldn't jump.
Right. And I think the thing worth mentioning, and maybe the reason why people don't talk about it as much, is I think the implication to some could be that you're sitting there like for 10 minutes like weighing the options, like should I hit like all those people that are like standing waiting for that movie, or should I just keep driving? Like, you're not like pros and cons in your brain, like whatever, like this is happening in like probably pretty close to like a split second. You know, you're not sitting there pondering and like, I don't know, what do I feel like doing today? It's so quick. So I think people don't talk about it.
Vehicular homicide.
Like, is this something I feel like doing on this Tuesday? But I think that is what if somebody had truly never experienced it, they might assume like, whoa, okay, you're a psycho. Right. But really that's like the whole thing is that it comes and goes like as quickly as anything, and then all of a sudden you're just like, that was weird.
Which is why it feels to me like it happens so naturally, and I remember it happening as such a small child that it wasn't like culturally imposed on me or anything. I feel like it's just a mechanism of the brain. Like it's just some function of your brain that as you're standing on top of a mountain or you're doing something that one of the options is to cause great devastation, like your brain just automatically sort of presents that option to you.
Yeah.
Like it's like not conscious, it's like programmed in your brain from back when we were monkeys.
Yeah. Well, and there's probably all kinds of, like, I think the Call of the Voids, like, specifically focuses on doing something, destructive.
Right.
But not only destructive to other people, but at least just destructive to you.
Right.
But there's probably other urges that are similar where it's just, it's that momentary thought of just like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like, every possibility is technically open to me.
So one time, though I used to be an art handler, and I've moved very expensive paintings.
Yes, you have.
And so, like, you'll have a several $1 million painting in your hands, and there is that urge to just, like, what if I just, like, like, I've literally thought of, like, the feeling of a knife, like, just slicing slicing canvas. And it's, like, a split second while I'm holding a painting. And I think about, like, what if I just, like, destroyed this Picasso painting right now? I haven't, never would.
Right.
But, like, that it's that same idea of, like, your brain presenting that option. Like, you could destroy this right now. You could destroy this valuable something.
It makes sense because all the things that come up, because I think that would count as, like, Call of the Void, where it's something really destructive and would be pretty devastating for you.
Right.
Wouldn't kill you, but it would be bad.
Right.
Where, I think it's just, there's some part of us that just, you're curious about what that would be. Maybe partly because you'd never do it.
Right.
Like, personally, I don't know for sure, but I can't imagine ever jumping off a cliff.
No.
Even if I had, like, safeguards, I don't think I'd jump off a cliff with, like, a parachute.
Right.
So I don't see that happening, but I think that's part of why your brain has that thought, because it's just like, what would it be like if I did?
You wouldn't, but what if you did?
Right, what if you did? So it's just that, it's that curiosity of, like, part of you does want to know.
Right.
Like, I would love to have things like virtual reality become more of a thing in my lifetime. Obviously, I don't want to simulate, like, killing people, but it would be cool to simulate not jumping off a building and dying. But I imagine, like, the feeling of jumping off a building before you hit the ground would probably be kind of cool. Like, that free falling. Yeah. As long as you didn't have to die at the end, which you do. So that sucks. And that's why most people don't do it, because whatever. But it'd be cool to feel some of those things, because really, like, realistically, we won't have the option to feel it. Because the only option includes death. Jumping off a bridge and dying.
Yes.
So, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
And, like, again, people don't really talk about it that much because it makes you sound like you may be a little dangerous. Yeah. But it's really not a dangerous thing. And tons of people, I'm sure even the 50% estimate is probably modest.
I'd say so.
Because, again, like, this is only relying on doing studies and talking to people. And, again, not everybody's going to be like,
self-reporting is not reliable.
No. So, and I think, again, the reason a lot of people wouldn't admit it is because of worry or shame or whatever. But
or they might even not, like, it probably happens and people don't even necessarily realize it. Right. That realizing that they're, like contemplating some, almost like worst case scenario for whatever they're doing. And I'm sure that people think about it and they just rationalize in their head as like, oh yeah, like I'm just playing through scenarios in my head. Or like, I wasn't thinking about jumping. I was just thinking about, like, what it would feel like if you did jump. You know what I mean? Like, they can kind of rationalize it away. So I'd bet probably closer to 100% of people have experienced it at least once in their life.
Well, I think, the idea of mental illness and of, being suicidal is such a, like, stigmatized thing in our society. Like, that I think if somebody had a choice of, like, admitting something that implied that they could have some type of mental illness, which this doesn't even, but it would be, I feel like people could lump it in with the same idea that, like, if I say that I felt this, people are going to think that
you thought about killing yourself.
Right, exactly. Like, you thought about killing yourself, or, like, you have a mental illness, and people are going to be like, no. Like, no. Which, again, is also silly, like, as we've talked about. So many people have mental illness of some degree, of some type, or multiple different types. Yep. It's not a big deal. No. We're all struggling with shit, but
everybody goes to the doctor, but if you go to a therapist, they're like, ooh. Yeah.
I got no issues. Right. I got, like, OCD and anxiety and depression and all kinds of shit. It's not a big deal. But a lot of people don't want to be lumped in with that, so I feel like they, if they were asked, even in, like, a more confidential study, they'd be like, no. Right. Because maybe they don't want to admit that they felt it, but it's not a big deal. And it's just something your brain does, which, again, I can see would be scary, though.
Right.
Same as, like, the Folie à Deux. Like,
Yeah.
knowing that chances are, like, if you had, like, the Call of the Void, you wouldn't do anything.
Right.
The idea that your brain could so spontaneously and, like, without your permission
Right.
be like, oh, what if I just fucking jumped off this ferry?
Right.
Is a little scary.
It is scary.
And then, yeah, I mean, one of my biggest fears, it's not even a fear of having mental illness, because, again, I do and have for a long time, so it's like,
Right.
there's no point in being scared of that. But
Right.
the idea of, like, truly losing your mind
Oh, yeah.
is terrifying for me.
Yep.
Because you can't control it,
Right.
really. And this would kind of fall in that, like, the idea of, like, what if I was on top of a building and I had an overwhelming urge to do it and I did it?
Right.
Like, what if I did just
And
jump?
you regretted it the second you jumped.
Yeah, the second you jumped, you're like, oh, shit. So, thankfully, the Call of the Void doesn't really do that. Again, this is not the same as suicide, or even
Right.
contemplating suicide.
Right.
But it's close enough that I think it probably scares some people.
I think so, too.
Yeah. So, kind of cool.
Interesting.
So, if you've ever felt that in any type of situation where you just had a thought of just like, what if I did this crazy thing?
Yep.
You have experienced the Call of the Void.
Happens to me all the time.
You're not alone yet. It happens
I
all
don't know
the
what that
time.
means.
Like, every time I'm on the edge of any high building, it's just like,
No, literally.
I could do that.
Seriously.
Yeah. Yeah.
Standing in front of a famous painting in a gallery, and I'm like, what if I just punched it?
Yeah. Dude, I've been like, I photograph weddings, and I've been at a wedding, and it's sometimes it's like the thought of, what if I just like threw my camera down and just left? Like, what if I just got, like, I'm driving from the ceremony to the reception, I'm like, what if I just went home right now? It's not even like, again, it's not a reflection of anything. It's not like I'm having a terrible time.
Right.
Or I hate my job. I've actually never really experienced that at a wedding that was, like, even stressful particularly. It's like a wedding that's just going well and you're having a good time, and then you just have this, like, quick thought of just like, what if I just left?
What if I just flipped this table with the cake on it?
Exactly. Like shit like that, where it's like, I wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
Of course I would never do that.
Right.
So like some guests are playing Jenga and I'm like, what if I just went over there and just punched through that Jenga while they're playing?
That's
like-
probably like the least destructive thing you can do.
Yeah, it would be kind of funny, but it's just that feeling, and then you start to think, like, and those are more funny situations, so like,
Right.
I'll start laughing to myself because I think about like what would happen if I did do it, and of course in your mind, like, punching through the Jenga would just be like a funny moment, like people would just be like, okay,
Did
and
the
then I would just be
photographer
like,
just punch our Jenga?
yeah, I'd be like, oh, sorry, gotta go take some family photos now. But it's that thought, and yeah, so I start chuckling to myself, and my assistant's like, what are you laughing at? And it's like, it's too much to explain
yeah.
that I just had this random thought of like punching through the Jenga those people are playing. But yeah, same kind of idea, where it's just you think of like some crazy ass thing, and you're just like, what if I just did that?
But you don't.
But you don't. We all mostly keep it in check.
Mostly.
But life would be a little funner if we didn't. At least with minor things like
right.
punching through the Jenga. Or flipping the cake. That would be kind of fun.
It'd be wild.
It'd be okay.
It'd be a great story.
Nobody would die. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of cool.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah, good topic.
This was good.
So like I said, it's similar because, again, like the intrusive thoughts
Yeah.
for both. Like, most people have experienced the intrusive thoughts,
Right.
but it's like not letting it go further.
Right.
Which is kind
where-
of what Call of the Void is.
Right.
Is experiencing it, but you're not going through with it.
And Folie à Deux is those intrusive thoughts just
Yeah.
fucking
Just keep on going.
just keep going.
Yeah.
And nest up in your brain.
Yeah. So,
It's interesting.
yeah, kind of cool.
So both unknowable because we're not really sure why they function the way that they do. We're not really
Right.
sure what they really do to like the brain and
Yeah.
what purpose they serve, if any.
Right. Yeah, they've both been studied, but nothing has been,
Yeah.
defined as far as like, this is why it happens. This is who it happens to. It's just like, don't know.
Right.
It's just a
Some
thing.
weird shit.
Yeah, some weird shit.
Death Drive.
Yeah, the Death Drive. I like that.
Yeah.
That could be a cool movie, I
Right.
think. Probably wouldn't even be related to Call of the Void, but it would be cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Death Drive.
Yeah. Well, so episode 12
In the can.
of Unknowable.
Unknowable.
All right, so that's not totally the end, because you should go check out our stuff.
Yes.
Go to Facebook, Instagram, leave a review,
Please.
tell people about us, tell us
to
what
us.
you think. Yeah, talk to us, suggest stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Unknowable.
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 Unknowable. Love you.